My name is Yulia Volga and I'm from Russia. I moved to Alanya in September and now I permanently live in Turkey. There were quite strong tremors in Alanya, even though we were 500 kilometers away from the epicenter. My husband and I woke up because the bed was staging and the chandeliers were swaying. We were scared but took no action. The second shock was at 1 p.m. as far as I remember. I remember it very well because I was working at my computer, sitting at the desk. When we realized the scale of the tragedy and saw on TV what had happened in Hatay and in those epicenter cities, I immediately realized that I would like to go and help. Unfortunately, I could not leave earlier on the second or third day. There were lots of things to buy. Naturally, we didn't have any sponsors. We did it all with our own money, with donations from relatives and acquaintances. Accordingly, our departure unfortunately took place only on Friday. When in the bus we drove up to Hatay, we saw fallen houses and destroyed roads. We drove around the roads. They were broken in half. We saw many refugees. These people were sitting on the roads asking for help. All of this is incomparable. Of course, your assumptions are nothing compared to what we saw. When we arrived directly in Hatay, of course, it was only shock, pain and tears. We tried to control ourselves, but it was extremely difficult. About 70% of the houses there were completely destroyed, and the rest of the houses were uninhabitable. We were specifically in the province of Antakya. All the inhabitants had been evacuated and taken by the emergencies ministry to different cities in Turkey, or they had gone to their relatives. Of course, they were still residents there. Quite a few of them stayed there. They were those who were waiting for their loved ones to be released from the trouble. When we arrived on the fifth day, it looked something like that. There was a collapsed building. Rescue work was taking place. The house was gradually being viewed and partially destroyed, and relatives were sitting around behind a special fence. It looked like that. There was a bonfire and 10-15 people around it. They gathered either in families or in the neighborhood, and they sat there around the clock. They didn't go somewhere to sleep or wash, they were always there. They were sitting and waiting. Of course, I pity them very much. I was so scary to look at them, because you understood they were just ordinary people like us. They clearly seemed to be well dressed when they ran out of the house. They had nice clothes, talked well, they were well-mannered and very friendly. We talked to many of them. But on the fifth day, they looked as if they were homeless. They were all dirty, exhausted. They were staying awake 24 hours a day. They were constantly waiting for information about who had been found. For each body that was taken out from under the rubble, all relatives were called for identification. It's a horrible picture because they ran, cried, they were taken to a designated enclosed area, where they were shown who had been extracted. And then, of course, there's crying and screaming when they realized it was their relative. And it's horrible. A team worked on each destroyed house. Several excavators and rescuers who were there. Of course, taking into account the number of destroyed houses, we started working on the fifth day. Anyway, there were not enough rescuers. They worked in shifts. In principle, as much debris as we went around. There was someone working somewhere, maybe not as many as necessary, although a lot of rescuers came from different countries. Each team of Imercom from a foreign country worked on the destroyed house, where their nationals were listed. I had never noticed any problems in relations between different nationalities. We helped everyone. Different people of different nationalities approached us, and it didn't make any difference at all. It seems to me that those who came there were united by all this. Because you saw grief and came face to face with it. You saw that tragedy here and now. It was scary and the rest didn't matter anymore. We had a small medical center set up where we all were staying. People were constantly turning to us. Every minute someone came up. Practically everyone had cut feet, torn nails and cut fingers. When they came to us for bandaging, they were very happy that it could be done, because they had been walking like that for 5 days. They probably didn't have time for it, and they only came to us now. We bandaged and treated them, and they told us everything that had happened to them. We were called in the evening, it was close to the nightfall. A military man came running in and shouted, "Doctor, it's urgent, we have an emergency," and we ran. It was only a few steps away, and there was a car not far away with a military man lying in it, unconscious, in a very deep faint. His tongue was stuck in his throat. He regained consciousness, and we had already pumped him out using the usual methods, ammonia, water and tea. He started talking to me, as usual. You ask, "What's the date today?" He said a name. I think it was Asim. I was very glad he was alive, thank God, because he was really all grey. And his commander said Asim was his daughter. He served here in the army, in the same Hatay. And in that house near which we were working, and which was completely destroyed, he lived and had a flat there. His wife, daughter and mother-in-law stayed there, and he hadn't slept or eaten for 6 days. He hoped that they would be found alive, but unfortunately that didn't happen. They all died. Another story was happy, thank God. Not all were sad. A nurse who lived also in that house near where we worked came to our nursing station. She came just to help us. She told us that when the earthquake happened, she was on duty, but her 10-year-old daughter and her nanny were at home. When it happened, she was still alive, because the hospital was not destroyed, even though it was badly damaged. She ran home, the house was destroyed, and her daughter came out from under the rubble herself. And another eerie side is the moment of silence. It happens several times a day. How did it happen? When someone, a rescuer or someone who worked there, had some suspicion and they all had whistles, they started blowing their whistle really hard. And everyone who had whistles started passing it on down the chain. It turned out that whole big side was whistle, whistle and whistle. Everything stopped, machinery stopped, people stopped walking and talking, and there it was loudly, constantly this hammering. Lots of people, soldiers, everyone was walking and saying something over the radio. There was a very strong noise load all the time, but at the point there came a deadly silence in the truest sense of the word, and everyone was so strict about it, everyone stopped. And indeed, it's a few minutes of complete silence, and you saw it all in front of you. The sun was shining, and there was complete silence. People were all standing and waiting, listening, listening and listening. It's terrifying. The feeling of a dead city, it really struck me when you walked at night. We walked from base to base. When we walked through a dark city, you saw these shops, pharmacies, and they were intact. You know, some windows were broken, you could see something had fallen inside, but it's like everything's alive in there. And that was the feeling, it's like a horror movie for real. You were walking through a dark city, nothing worked. The lights weren't on anywhere. There was no electricity, just these pussycats scurrying around, and that feeling of a ruined city like in some really scary movie. I don't even have the words to explain how everybody is united by this grief. And they are really... They felt their own grief, but they also helped their neighbors. They helped the soldiers. Maybe if they understood that, if they felt this grief inside them, they understood that they should help somebody else. Maybe that made them feel better. I think every country should help the country that is in trouble despite all the political games, problems, hatred and so on. All this does not matter compared to the trouble. I think people in general should unite in these moments, in these cases. Otherwise, how else? Otherwise, unfortunately, we will never have peace in our world. Unification is very important.
We invite eyewitnesses of climate disasters as well as anyone who has specific knowledge of such events to be interviewed. Please contact us, share your story. For the whole world to know the truth, participation of every person is important.